Hello and welcome to the 14th edition of the Clarke Park Show. You'll see that it's a very different weather day today in January to what it has been in the last number of editions. Bright blue skies and glorious sunshine. But you can always look at the positives in everything, because as I've said before about balance, and there's always pros and cons. With the sunny weather, yes, it's great, it's a lovely dry crisp air as well, but what I noticed is in the videos you see the shadows of everything, and the shadows that cover my face. If I walk past fenced railings, it's very funny, I see all these railings whizzing by my face on the video, and that's hard to control when I'm walking and talking. So the big plus of a drab grey day as it is today is you have consistency, and even when I pause and continue, you don't see me in all different colours of my face each time, where it makes it so obvious. The beauty of this is you have that drab grey consistency throughout. And the other thing I would say is what you see here is just the greyness, but what you can't feel is it's a very damp kind of cold. It's a different kind of cold, and there's real damp in the air. So I've got some of the subjects that I wanted to cover today, and there are some big topics. There is a lot going on in the world at the moment, and I wanted to talk about Davos and the World Economic Forum, their 50th year, and there are two big topics that come out of that. Also, a fascinating programme I watched last night with Packham. He's a nature lover and environmentalist, and that was all about population, 7.7 billion, which is the current world population. And then finally, about the final instalment of a programme I've covered before called Vegan Feel. And this is where for 3 weeks a team of vegans, they've never met each other before, come from different backgrounds and thinking about this and approaches, and it's where they try to persuade the people of Merthyr Tydfil, a town in Wales, to change their habits and stop eating meat, or at least eat less meat and go vegan. And there is a fundamental message and moral of the story there, which I will also share with you. It's my message, it's my moral of the story that I took from it, from some of their conclusions. Okay, so before I go into those big topics, you see there's some really weighty topics, meaty topics, or if we go vegan, meatless meaty topics to cover there. But the other thing before I go into that to cover with you is I had a great call this morning. It was my second call for my new venture here of writing for impact and helping for people to write their story, write their content for maximum impact. And the first two have been all about writing their first book. And when they come out, wow, these are going to be two really amazing, powerful books, both very, very different in their content and where they're coming from, but both very powerful stories and messages to share and tell. So I really am excited about this. I really look forward to collaborating with these books. On the second, it seems that for that one I may be the ghostwriter for that book, and I'll be really excited to start something new there from beginning to the end. So watch this space for when those books are actually published. Okay, so moving on to the heavier topics now, and firstly with the WEF, the World Economic Forum, and there were two things from that. One on the climate change, and that was really fascinating with Donald Trump, the president of the US, and you will have seen this because it's been so very well quoted, that he says that the people who keep on about climate change are the perennial doom-mongers, and they are the pessimists, and he believes that we should be optimistic. Everything is fine, everything is great, he is great, America is great, employment is great, and for that we should be optimistic. And don't worry about everything else, everything is fine. Now, of course, that maybe was a pointed aim at one very well-known activist there, the young girl, 17 years old, Greta Thunberg, without naming her, but that's probably who he had in his sights there. And he also probably thinks that green activists, environmentalists, climate change campaigners, he probably thinks they are a small minority, and that is why he can speak like that. But let me tell you, I'm not a green activist. I'm not a campaigner. I'm not an environmentalist. I've never been on a protest or demonstration in my life. I am simply a pragmatist. Whoops, sorry, I'm taking a route diversion here today. I am what I would call a pragmatist, and I go by what I see with my own eyes, what I see and hear. And with the climate, the evidence, my goodness, it's building so ever more strongly, so much more. Huge evidence, and evidence of the devastation that is taking place right now, and in so many different parts of the world, these massive shifts, massive changes. And you don't have to be a green activist or a climate change campaigner or an environmentalist to really recognise all these serious problems and challenges for our planet, and to know that we've really got to make some serious changes, some big changes in our lifestyles and what we consume, how we consume it, and how we dispose of the waste. And before I go on to the 7.7 billion population, maybe I'll go on to that now, and then I'll come back to the other key message coming out of the WEF in Davos in Switzerland. So, leading on from the point I've just made, so with Chris Packham, he also had a really interesting interview with Sir David Attenborough, by the way, who is of the same view, that is what they call the elephant in the room, the big elephant in the room, and that is population growth, or even population explosion. And the big revelation there is they showed on a chart the population throughout the 1800s, and during the 1800s up until 1880, it bounced along, roughly along that line of about 1 billion. Very little increase there. Then from 1880 of about 1 billion to 1960, the population of the world then trebled to 3 billion people. But the most staggering statistic of all is then to see from 1960 to the present time, okay, let's say 2020, even though it's early 2020 now, but the current population of the world is now 7.7 billion. So that is a massive increase in 60 years of 4.7 billion people. And the other shocking revelation is that if we continue at this rate, in 2050, the world population will be 10 billion people. Now, what they were looking at is the Earth's resources and how we can accommodate those 10 billion or even the 7.7 billion we have now in terms of our needs and our consumption and our waste and what that does to the Earth, and whether this planet can actually cope with all of that. And some of the stats that came out was that if every country lived like the UK in the same way of living, you'd need 2 of the planet Earth to sustain that. If every country lived in the way that America lives and consumes and disposes of its waste, you would need 4 planet Earths to be able to accommodate that. And that's really thought-provoking, isn't it? And scary at the same time, because many other countries are developing fast, and China has massively developed. They're responsible for nearly 28% of all emissions, and America is responsible for 15%. Interestingly, the UK is only just over 1%. But we really need to think about this. And the other controversial part of this, of course, is they looked into this, is the right of procreation. And other countries have tried this, of methods of trying to stem population growth. They've tried it in India, they've tried it in China, and they had to give up on both their methods because it just didn't work, or it threw up other challenges and problems. And then you have another issue where there are certain countries where the population is growing rapidly. In Nigeria, for example, their average growth rate is 5 children for each couple. What they say is it needs 2.1 billion to maintain the current population, and we're currently on an average of 2.4 billion. In the UK, by the way, we're on 1.7 billion, and in some Scandinavian countries 1.4 billion. Now, I can't moralise too much about that as a father of 4 children, way above that 2.1 billion, but then back in the 90s I really was not aware of any of this information that I'm sharing with you now. If I was, maybe things may have been a little bit different. So, and the other thing we need to look at is, yes, what they call mega cities. So Lagos is a mega city in Nigeria, Sao Paulo in Brazil is another one they named, and the population surges have been incredible. I think in Sao Paulo they have gone from 6 million, the city population, to 22 million, and I think that's over a period of about 20 years. And in Lagos they have gone from 4 million to 20 million as their city's population in I think even lesser time. So we really need to think about this in a serious way of population growth, sustainability, and what it's doing for the planet. Then coming back to coming back to the about a key finding or key discussion point at the WEF, and that was about corporates. Oh shit.